The camera lingers on the ruined warehouse. The glowing dust of the shattered diamond drifts into the night air like fading stars. Sirens wail faintly in the distance. Then, just before the screen fades to black, one tiny shard of the diamond flickers, pulsing faintly with light. A gloved hand emerges from the shadows, scooping it up. A distorted voice whispers, "This isn't over." The screen cuts to black. Bold white text fades in. Want to see what happens next? Subscribe now and don't miss the next story. The neighborhood looked ordinary from the outside. Manicured lawns, polished mailboxes, hedges trimmed at perfect right angles. But I knew better. Behind the smiles and clipboard inspections, the homeowners association officers were plotting something that went far beyond enforcing fence heights or mailbox colors. It started with a theft, quiet, surgical, and wrong in every possible way. Late one Thursday night, three HOA board members, Donald Pierce, Meredith Lyle, and the always smirking Tom Henshaw, slipped past the alarms of the Westbrook History Museum. The security cameras went dark for exactly 9 minutes, just long enough for them to break into the restricted archive room. That was where the museum stored its unverified artifacts: dusty chests, rolled maps, forgotten documents that hadn't been cataloged for public view. Among them was a parchment map, old enough to crack at the edges, sealed under glass and locked with an archive number. It wasn't supposed to leave that room, but Meredith had a skeleton key she shouldn't have had, and Donald carried a crowbar for backup. They pried open the case, stuffed the map into a waterproof tube, and vanished into the night with it. By the time the museum staff discovered the break-in, the evidence had been expertly staged: a shattered skylight, footprints that led nowhere, and a fake set of fingerprints belonging to a janitor who'd called in sick that day. On paper, it looked like another petty heist. To me, it was a red flag. As an FBI field agent, I'd spent years dealing with white-collar criminals and smugglers. But this crime smelled different. HOA officers weren't supposed to be raiding museums. Their world was supposed to revolve around pool passes and parking permits, yet here they were, committing a federal crime with precision most gangs would envy. I didn't know then what they had stolen. The museum hadn't. To made the map public, not even the curators understood its value, but the HOA officers did. They followed the map like zealots, driving miles into the hills outside the city, where abandoned mines and overgrown trails twisted into forgotten land. After days of searching, they struck gold, or something far more dangerous. Hidden beneath a collapsed well, buried under stone and rust, was a chest sealed with iron bands. Inside, relics tarnished with age, coins minted centuries ago, and at the very center, nestled in rotting velvet, a diamond so large it seemed to drink in the light around it. Bigger than a fist, cut into impossible facets, it wasn't just a gem. It was a fortune that could topple markets. That was the night the HOA officers stopped being suburban officials and became criminals of the highest order, and that was the night my job became personal. I wasn't just chasing a stolen artifact anymore. I was stepping into a conspiracy that would wind its way from quiet cul-de-sacs to the highest levels of government. And if I failed, the world wouldn't just see an FBI agent who couldn't stop a group of corrupt neighbors. It would see the president himself manipulated by thieves who thought they could control history. The game had already begun. The first clue fell into my lap the next morning. A call came in from the museum's security director, voice shaky with disbelief. "Agent, I don't know how they pulled it off. It's like they knew the system better than my own staff." I drove straight to the Westbrook History Museum. From the outside, the place looked untouched, but inside the tension was thick. Uniformed officers cordoned off the archive wing, and evidence techs dusted for prints. I pushed through the glass doors, flashing my badge, and the director rushed toward me with the urgency of a man whose reputation was hanging by a thread. "They didn't take anything from the exhibits?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not that we can confirm. The archives, though." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "They broke into Section D. That room's restricted. Even my staff doesn't handle those items without clearance." I stepped into the archive chamber, and the air shifted. It smelled of old paper, dust, and something else, burned ozone from where they'd tampered with the alarm system. The case they'd broken into sat splintered on the floor, shards of safety glass scattered like ice. The display label was still taped to the wood. Artifact number D197, unverified cartographic document, 18th century. So they hadn't stolen a jewel, a weapon, or even a rare coin. They'd stolen a map. Something didn't add up. A museum heist is usually about money, diamonds, paintings, gold. Why risk everything for a brittle piece of parchment? Unless, of course, that parchment led to something greater. I crouched down near the display. The glass shards had been swept to one side almost too neatly, and the lock hadn't been destroyed. It had been picked. That meant skill, not random vandals, but people who knew what they were doing. "Do you have a suspect list?" I asked. The director rubbed his temples. "We found fingerprints, but—" He trailed off, pointing to a folder on the evidence table. I flipped it open. My stomach tightened. The prints belonged to one of the museum janitors, a man with no criminal history who just happened to be out sick the night of the heist. Too clean, too obvious. It screamed setup. As I scanned the reports, another detail emerged. A traffic camera had caught 3 figures leaving the museum's neighborhood, bundled in dark clothing, their SUV's plates partially obscured with mud. But the make and model were clear, a dark green Lincoln Navigator. That rang a bell. The exact same SUV was registered to Donald Pierce, HOA president of Crestwood Estates. A man-eyed crow said paths with once before, when he tried to weasel out of a zoning violation by throwing his political connections around. A man with ambition, ego, and money problems. My pulse quickened. HOA officers stealing from a museum. Why? I leaned closer to the broken case, brushing my gloved fingers across the base. There, almost invisible, was a faint scuff of dirt. Not just any dirt. It looked reddish, like the kind you found in the abandoned quarries north of the city. If my hunch was right, Pierce and his cronies weren't after a map for the art value. They were chasing whatever treasure it pointed to. And if they'd already found it, the stakes had just exploded. I left the museum with one certainty. This was no longer about theft. It was about control, power, and a diamond so massive it could destabilize more than just a local HOA board. And that meant I was already running out of time. By the time I returned to the Bureau's field office, the Navigator was already flagged in our system. Donald Pierce had parked it neatly in his driveway, as if mocking the very idea of suspicion. No scratches, no mud, no trace of a crime. He was careful, too careful. Men like him thought they could clean up their sins with bleach and landscaping contracts. I sat at my desk, staring at the case file. On the surface, the suspects were nothing more than suburban paper pushers. But beneath the polo shirts and HOA letterheads, they were plotting something deeper. I pulled every record I could find on them. Donald Pierce, HOA president; Meredith Lyle, treasurer; Tom Henshaw, vice president. Together they had controlled Crestwood Estates like their personal fiefdom for years. Fines, fees, bylaws twisted into weapons against homeowners. Now they had crossed the line into federal territory. The problem was evidence. Suspicion wasn't enough. The stolen map hadn't been publicized, which meant that if I accused them now, they'd play dumb and sue the Bureau for harassment. I needed proof, something undeniable. That night, surveillance began. I parked in an unmarked sedan just outside Crestwood's pristine gates. From the shadows, I watched their houses. Lights flicked on and off in familiar patterns. Sprinklers clicked alive, and neighbors walked dogs under street lamps. Ordinary, boring. But Pierce's house wasn't ordinary tonight. At exactly 10:47 p.m., his garage door opened. The green Navigator rolled out, headlights dark, coasting down the street like a shadow. Minutes later, Meredith's Lexus joined it, followed by Tom's pickup. 3 vehicles moving in convoy, slipping out of the neighborhood as if on silent agreement. I followed at a distance, heart pounding. They drove north, past the city limits, into the dark veins of countryside where old quarries and forgotten mines littered the land. The further they went, the rougher the roads became, dust spraying under their wheels. Finally, they turned off onto a dirt path, half swallowed by weeds. I killed my headlights and parked, following on foot through the brush. The night air was cold, filled with the buzz of insects and the crunch of gravel under my boots. Ahead, faint lantern light flickered between trees. I crouched low, moving closer. Through the leaves, I saw them gathered around a clearing. The chest was already there, dragged from the earth like a corpse exhumed. Its lid lay open, and even in the dim light, I could see it. The diamond, enormous, dazzling, as if the stars themselves had been carved into its surface. Pierce's voice carried through the still night. This is it. This isn't just a gem. This is our ticket. No one in Washington will be able to ignore us when we control this. Meredith whispered something sharp, her tone edged with greed. Do you have any idea what this is worth? With the right buyer, we could buy half the state. Tom chuckled nervously, but his eyes never left the stone. Or we could vanish. No more HOA meetings, no more reports, just disappear, rich beyond belief. I gritted my teeth. They weren't just planning to sell it. They were planning to leverage it. Against who, I didn't know yet. But one thing was certain. That diamond wasn't just valuable. It was dangerous. I pulled out my camera, snapping silent shots through the branches. Chest, diamond, faces lit by greed. Enough to prove they had found something. Enough to start building the case. Then the air shifted. Pierce stopped speaking, his head tilting slightly. Someone's here, he muttered. My stomach dropped. The beam of a flashlight sliced through the dark, sweeping dangerously close to where I crouched. The flashlight beam swung wide, grazing the brush only a few feet from where I crouched. My pulse hammered in my ears, every muscle screaming at me to move, but I stayed frozen. One wrong shift of a branch, one crunch of gravel under my boots, and they'd have me dead to rights. Check the tree line, Pierce ordered, his voice low but commanding. No way we're alone out here. Tom hesitated. It's probably just an animal. Then prove it, Pierce snapped. Tom's boots crunched closer. I could see the glow of his flashlight cutting between the trunks, each sweep brighter, closer, until it lit up the edge of my shoe. My hand tightened around the Glock at my side. If he spotted me, I'd have no choice but to engage. But a firefight here, in the middle of nowhere, would ruin everything. My cover, my evidence, the case. It would all vanish in gunfire. I shifted slowly, pressing deeper into the brush. A thorn tore into my sleeve, drawing a bead of blood, but I didn't flinch. The flashlight beam lingered for a second longer, then slid away. Nothing, Tom called back. Just trees. Pierce grunted, unconvinced. Stay sharp. We can't afford slip-ups. Pierce grunted, unconvinced. Stay sharp. We can't afford slip-ups. The three of them turned their attention back to the chest. Meredith pulled a waterproof case from her bag and carefully wrapped the diamond inside. Even from here, I could see how the gem seemed to swallow the lantern light, reflecting it back in cold, fractured rays. Tomorrow, Pierce said, we start reaching out to buyers, discreet ones, people who know the value of this kind of thing. And if someone asks questions, Meredith pressed, then they won't be around to ask twice, Pierce replied without hesitation. My stomach tightened. This wasn't just about greed, it was about ruthlessness. These weren't amateurs fumbling into a payday. They were organized, dangerous, and willing to kill to protect what they had. I snapped 3 more photos, the diamond being packed, the chest lying empty, their faces lit by the glow of the lantern. It was enough to prove possession, but not enough to nail them in court. Not yet. I slid back into the darkness, every step careful, every breath measured. Only when the faint glow of their lanterns faded behind me did I break into a silent sprint toward my car. By the time I reached the sedan, sweat soaked my collar. I slid behind the wheel, hands trembling against the steering wheel. I had proof, yes, but I also had a problem. The Bureau wouldn't greenlight a raid based on photographs alone. They'd demand context, connections, a chain of evidence that tied the diamond directly to the theft. And worse, if word of this gem leaked too soon, it wouldn't just be buyers coming after it. It would be governments, cartels, and opportunists from every corner of the globe. As I started the engine, headlights flared in my rearview mirror. Another vehicle, black, no plates visible. It crept down the dirt path, silent as a predator, heading straight toward where I'd park. Damn it, I muttered, shifting into gear. My cover wasn't blown, not yet, but if I stayed another second, it would be. The chase was on. Gravel sprayed behind my tires as I gunned the sedan forward, headlights still off. The black SUV in my rear view accelerated, its beams igniting the night like a predator's eyes. My heart slammed against my ribs. They'd spotted me. The dirt road wound between skeletal trees, branches clawing at my windshield. My unmarked sedan wasn't built for this terrain, but I had no choice. I kept the wheel tight, skidding around bends, the black SUV thundering closer with every second. Pierce's voice echoed in my head. If someone asks questions, they won't be around to ask twice. They weren't going to let me leave alive. I yanked the wheel left, tires biting into soft earth, barely missing a tree trunk. The SUV mirrored every move, its weight making the ground shake as it bore down on me. A spotlight snapped on from its roof, blinding me in white fire. Son of a... I hissed, slamming the brakes. The SUV roared past, momentum carrying it forward into the path. I threw the sedan into reverse, spun the wheel hard, and tore back down the trail in the opposite direction. My engine screamed in protest, but I didn't care. Distance was my only chance. Behind me, the SUV fishtailed, corrected, and came thundering back, headlights bouncing like angry eyes in the dark. The road split ahead, one path leading deeper into the quarry fields, the other toward the highway. I chose the highway. The quarry was a death trap. I hit the pavement at 90, tires shrieking as rubber met asphalt. The SUV burst out of the dirt road seconds later, headlights locking on me like a missile. Now it was speed versus speed. I flicked on my dash recorder. If this went south, at least there'd be evidence of pursuit. I dialed the bureau with one hand, phone on speaker. This is Agent. A deafening bang cut me off. My rear window shattered, glass spraying across the seat. A round had been fired. Gunfire. They were escalating. I swerved, adrenaline spiking. This is Agent Redacted. I'm under pursuit. Black SUV, no plates, northbound on County 47. Hostile. Repeat, hostile. Shots fired. Static filled the line. Then the operator's voice crackled back. Units en route. Hold tight, Agent. Hold tight? I barked a humorless laugh. Easier said than done when a bullet just carved through the headrest inches from my skull. I veered off onto a narrow farm road, engine howling. The SUV followed, relentless. My sedan jolted over potholes, suspension groaning. Every instinct screamed to ditch the car and run, but open fields meant no cover. Up ahead, a rickety wooden bridge spanned a narrow ravine. The SUV's headlights flared brighter, closing the gap. They were planning to ram me, force me off the road before I reached it. I tightened my grip on the wheel. Fine, let them try. At the last second, I cut sharp left. My sedan clipped the bridge's side rail, sparks flying, but I stayed on the planks. The SUV wasn't so lucky. Its weight carried it too far. With a sickening crunch of metal, it slammed into the railing, wood snapping like twigs. For a frozen heartbeat, the vehicle teetered, then plunged nose first into the ravine below. I didn't wait to see the aftermath. I floored it across the bridge, my breath ragged, my pulse hammering. By the time I slowed, headlights from approaching sheriff cruisers lit the road ahead, reinforcements. I exhaled, hands trembling against the wheel. I'd survived the chase, but survival wasn't victory. The HOA officers still had the diamond, and now they knew someone was on their trail, which meant the real hunt was about to begin. The sheriff deputies swarmed me as soon as I pulled over, their cruisers blocking the road, red and blue lights painting the trees like a strobe. I stepped out, badge raised, still tasting the acrid tang of adrenaline in my mouth. Agent, you all right? One of them called. I nodded, though my chest still heaved with ragged breaths. Took fire. Black SUV, no plates. Pursuit ended in the ravine 3 clicks back. 2 deputies exchanged a look. We'll check it out. As they moved off, I leaned against my sedan, fighting to steady my hands. My dash cam was still rolling, recording everything. The pursuit, the gunfire, the crash. Hard evidence. But my mind wasn't on the footage. It was on the diamond. The HOA officers had just tipped their hand. If they were willing to arm themselves and chase down a federal agent, then the gem wasn't just some windfall they stumbled across. They knew its worth, and they knew it was worth killing for. Back at the bureau, the debrief ran long into the night. Supervisors filed in, analysts crowded around the dash cam footage, and the room buzzed with the kind of tension that meant a case was about to explode. You're telling us, my unit chief said, pacing the length of the conference room, That three suburban HOA officers, three people with no violent records, broke into a museum, stole a centuries-old map, found a chest full of treasure, and now possess a diamond the size of a baseball? Correct, I said evenly. He stopped pacing, arms folded. And you have photographs? I slid the memory card across the table. Faces, the chest, and the gem itself. The analysts leaned in as the projector flickered on. The images appeared on the wall, grainy night shots, but clear enough to make out Pierce, Meredith, and Tom standing over the open chest. And then the diamond, Ji Yamsung, gleaming like a captured star. The room went silent. My chief exhaled slowly. Jesus Christ. Another supervisor leaned forward, voice hushed. If this gets out, it'll cause a frenzy. Do you have any idea what that stone could be worth? I met his gaze. Enough to destabilize entire markets, enough to buy governments, which is exactly why they can't be allowed to sell it. A pause. Then my chief spoke again, this time with steel in his voice. All right. This isn't a burglary case anymore. This is national security. We're escalating this straight to the top. The next hours blurred into controlled chaos. Task forces assembled, briefings distributed, interagency calls lit up secure lines. By dawn, the Bureau had eyes on Crestwood Estates. Every exit watched, every phone tapped. The HOA officers were under surveillance, their lives dissected minute by minute. But surveillance has its limits. You can watch a criminal, you can track them, but you can't always predict them. That morning, Pierce made his move. Our wiretaps caught fragments of a call, his voice low and sharp. Arrange the meeting. Overseas buyer. Secure transport. No delays. He wasn't going to sit on the diamond. He was going to sell it. Fast. And worse, he had already lined up someone capable of moving it. By the time the analyst traced the call, it was too late. Pierce, Meredith, and Tom had vanished from Crestwood Estates, leaving behind only shuttered windows and parked cars. The HOA board wasn't just hiding a diamond anymore. They were on the move. And if I didn't find them first, that gem would disappear into the black veins of the international market. Forever. The morning air was sharp as broken glass when I drove back into Crestwood Estates. The neighborhood looked the same. Sprinklers hissing across perfect lawns, kids waiting for the school bus, joggers passing with earbuds in. But behind the blinds of three homes, everything had changed. The HOA leaders were ghosts now. No movement, that inside. Cars still in the driveways, newspapers left untouched on the steps. They hadn't just slipped away, they'd staged their exit, making it look as if they were still there. Clever, but not clever enough. I walked up Pierce's driveway, flashing my credentials at the two agents on perimeter duty. The front door had already been breached by the Bureau's entry team. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bleach. Too clean. Rooms stripped of anything personal. No laptops, no ledgers, no paper trails. Even the walls looked bare, as if they'd scrubbed away their very presence. They knew we were watching, one of the techs muttered, unplugging an empty router. They always knew, I corrected. Pierce didn't survive HOA politics by being sloppy. The only trace we found was a shred of parchment hidden in Pierce's desk drawer, a corner torn from the original map. On it, faint ink lines hinted at coordinates, but incomplete. He'd destroyed the rest. It wasn't evidence enough for court, but it told me something more valuable. Pierce was planning a second move, one the map alone wouldn't reveal. Meanwhile, Bureau analysts were tearing apart the intercepted call. The voice print matched Pierce. The phrase overseas buyer triggered alarms all the way up the chain. If the diamond left U.S. soil, recovery would become a geopolitical nightmare. I stood in the empty living room, staring at the suburban quiet outside. The sound of children laughing carried faintly down the street. All of them blissfully unaware that three of their so-called community leaders were preparing to sell a gem worth billions to people who wouldn't hesitate to use it as leverage against governments. That's when my phone buzzed. "Agent, this is Norcom Analysis," the voice said briskly. "We've got chatter from a flagged satellite phone bouncing between Maryland and the Atlantic. We think your suspects are reaching out to buyers offshore. possibly European syndicates. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Do we know where they're headed? We're still triangulating, but there's more. A secondary call was logged, encrypted. We caught fragments, keywords, port, manifest, and White House. That last word froze the blood in my veins. White House. Pierce wasn't just trying to sell the diamond. He was aiming higher, leveraging it against the government itself. I turned to the field team leader. We don't have days. We have hours. Pull every port manifest within a 200-mile radius. Cargo ships, private yachts, anything moving offshore. They're trying to smuggle it out, and I want to know where. The team scattered into motion. My chief's voice cracked over comms a moment later. Agent, this just escalated to executive level. You're on point. The president's office wants updates every hour. I stared out the window, fists tight at my sides. Pierce thought he was clever, thought he could outmaneuver federal agents with HOA tactics and black market buyers. But now he'd made a mistake. He'd put the White House in play. And that meant I wasn't just hunting thieves anymore. I was standing between them and the seat of American power. The Bureau's command center flickered with screens, each glowing with satellite feeds, port manifests, and live intel threads. The hum of urgency vibrated through the room. Analysts barking coordinates, field teams patching in reports, supervisors snapping orders like whip cracks. I stood in the middle of it all, eyes locked on a map pinned to the main monitor. Dozens of red markers dotted the East Coast, ports, private docks, and marinas within striking range. Somewhere in that web of harbors, Pierce and his cronies were preparing to move the diamond. Agent, one analyst called out, we've got movement at Port Fairmont. A cargo freighter filed a last-minute manifest under a shell company. Destination, Rotterdam. The company's a ghost. No tax records, no employees, just a name. Who filed it? I asked. Front company traced to a law firm in D.C. Guess who used to work there? The analyst turned, lips tight. Meredith Lyle. I swore under my breath. The HOA treasurer wasn't just handling budgets for neighborhood pools. She had international contacts, offshore accounts, and the brains to launder something as volatile as the diamond. My chief's voice thundered from behind me. All right, agent, this is your op now. If they get that stone aboard, it'll vanish into Rotterdam's underworld before we can blink. Get to Fairmont. Stop them before it ships. I grabbed my go bag and bolted for the door. The drive to Port Fairmont was a blur. Highways flashing under the wheels, my mind running through worst-case scenarios. By the time I reached the docks, the sun was bleeding into the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gray. The port was alive with motion. Cranes swinging containers, forklifts buzzing, seagulls screaming overhead. Too much chaos, too many places to hide. My team and I spread out, eyes sharp. That's when I spotted them. Donald Pierce stood near a warehouse, his blazer traded for a black windbreaker. Meredith was at his side, tapping furiously at a tablet. Tom lingered nearby, nervously scanning the dock as if expecting shadows to come alive. Between them was a steel case about the size of a lunch cooler, locked with biometric seals. The diamond. My earpiece crackled. Agent, we've got eyes from rooftop drones. 3 suspects confirmed. Armed. I ducked behind a stack of containers, lifting my binoculars. Pierce was on the phone. Voice clipped. Yes, the buyer's waiting offshore. We load tonight, no exceptions. And remember the plan. If anything feels wrong, we burn the bridge. Burn the bridge wasn't metaphorical. If Pierce felt cornered, he'd torch the evidence, maybe even kill witnesses. I clenched my jaw. This wasn't just about recovery anymore. This was about preventing chaos. I raised my mic. Hold positions. We need them to commit. If they load the case, we intercept before it hits the ship. Nobody moves until I say. Minutes stretched like hours. Sweat trickled down my temple despite the cold sea breeze. Then a forklift rolled up, and Meredith nodded to the driver. The case was lifted toward the freighter's ramp. My chest tightened. Once it crossed that gangplank, the diamond would be beyond our jurisdiction. I exhaled slowly, hand hovering over my comm switch. Units, stand by. We move in 3, 2. A gunshot cracked the air. Chaos erupted. The gunshot rang out like a thunderclap across the docks. Workers screamed, scattering as forklifts screeched to a halt and crates toppled over with a thunderous crash. I dropped flat behind cover, instinctively scanning the angles. But the shot hadn't come from us. Pierce spun, fury etched across his face. "Who fired?" he barked. Meredith's eyes widened as she pointed toward the far end of the dock. Out of the shadows, a fourth player emerged, figures in black tactical gear, masks covering their faces, weapons raised with chilling precision. Not locals, not amateurs, professionals. My earpiece crackled with confusion. "Agent, who the hell are they? Those aren't our people." "Foreign hitters," I muttered, my gut twisting. The buyer didn't trust Pierce. They sent their own extraction team. The masked squad opened fire, bullets sparking against containers, glass shattering from the freighter's cabin windows. Meredith dove behind the forklift, clutching the steel case. Tom panicked, firing wildly with a pistol he could barely hold straight. Pierce roared orders, dragging his people toward cover like a commander under siege. And me? I had seconds to decide. Intervene now, or watch the diamond slip into the hands of mercenaries who'd vanish into the night. "Engage," I ordered through clench teeth. "Teams, move in!" Gunfire erupted as Bureau units broke cover. The port transformed into a war zone, sirens wailing, civilians scrambling, bullets tearing through wooden pallets. I sprinted forward, weaving between containers, my Glock raised. I caught sight of Meredith crawling toward the forklift, the steel case clutched to her chest. I fired a warning shot into the ground near her hand. "FBI, drop it now!" Her eyes locked on mine, defiant. "Do you have any idea what this stone is? It's bigger than you, bigger than the Bureau, bigger than your whole country." Before I could answer, a mercenary yanked her up by the collar and shoved a rifle barrel into her ribs. Meredith screamed, the case tumbling onto the dock with a metallic thud. Pierce bellowed, charging after her, but a burst of gunfire pinned him back. Tom, wide-eyed, bolted into the maze of containers like a scared rabbit. The steel case lay between us all, unclaimed, glowing faintly under the docklights like the devil's bait. I lunged for it. A mercenary spotted me, raising his rifle. I dove, rolling hard, the case clanging into my arms as bullets sparked inches from my head. "Agent has the package," someone yelled through comms. But the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. Pierce snarled like an animal, shoving two of his own people aside as he came straight for me. His eyes burned with obsession, the diamond the only thing he could see. "This doesn't belong to you," he roared, swinging a heavy wrench down at me. I barely deflected it with my forearm, pain lancing through bone. The mercenaries regrouped, flanking us both, their rifles glinting in the port floodlights. For a heartbeat, HOA thieves and FBI agents weren't enemies anymore. We were both cornered by wolves that wanted the same prize. And then, above the chaos, the freighter's horn blared. The ship was pulling away from dock, its engines thundering as it slid toward open water. Pierce realized it at the same moment I did. If the mercenaries missed this chance, they'd vanish with their buyer. This dock was about to become a slaughterhouse. The freighter's horn bellowed again, drowning out the cacophony of gunfire. Its massive silhouette edged further into the dark Atlantic, engines pounding like war drums. If the diamond left this dock, the case would go from desperate to impossible. I had no choice. I bolted upright, steel case tight in my grip, and ran toward the nearest cover. Bullets whined past, slamming into crates and splintering wood inches from my head. Pierce came after me, faster than I expected for a man his age. His face was twisted with rage, his eyes wild, his windbreaker flapping as he closed the distance. He wasn't thinking strategy anymore. He was consumed. The diamond had hollowed him out, leaving only hunger. "Give it to me!" he screamed, hurling himself at me. His shoulder smashed into my ribs, knocking me against the container wall. The case nearly slipped from my hands. Pain shot through my side, but I drove my knee up, catching him hard in the gut. He grunted but didn't go down. Instead, he clawed at the case with both hands, his knuckles bloodied. "You think the Bureau can keep this safe? You think Washington won't hoard it for themselves? At least with me, it gets used." Used. The word chilled me. This wasn't just greed anymore. Pierce thought the diamond was a tool, a weapon. A mercenary squad broke from cover, firing suppressive bursts. Sparks showered from steel containers, and one round ricocheted off the case itself. Pierce shoved me harder, snarling, "Better I have it than them." I slammed my elbow into his jaw. He staggered back, spitting blood, but before I could press the advantage, two mercenaries advanced, rifles raised. I dove behind a stack of pallets, dragging the case with me. Splinters exploded as Rounds shredded the wood. Through the chaos, Meredith shouted, her voice ragged. She was pinned behind a forklift, waving frantically at Pierce. "Donald, leave it! We'll never make it out!" But Pierce didn't hear her, or maybe he didn't care. He staggered forward again, face swollen, jaw clenched, eyes locked only on me. "That stone belongs to me!" Gunfire cracked from the opposite end of the dock. Our tactical team had flanked the mercenaries. For the first time, the firefight shifted in our favor. Shouts of "FBI, drop your weapons!" cut through the chaos. One masked man went down, another retreated toward the freighter ramp. I seized the moment. Launching myself forward, I rammed my shoulder into Pierce, sending him sprawling across the wet dock planks. He crashed against a coil of ropes, dazed. The case was still in my grip, but my arms trembled with the strain of holding on to it through the fight. Overhead, the thrum of helicopter blades split the air. A bureau bird descended, its spotlight flooding the port with blinding white light. The mercenaries cursed, breaking formation, some scattering toward the freighter, others diving into the maze of containers. Pierce dragged himself to his knees, blood running down his face, still reaching for me, still reaching for it. I raised my sidearm, steady and cold. "It's over, Pierce. Don't move." For a heartbeat, he froze. Then slowly, a smile crept across his bruised mouth. "You think this is the end? The diamond's bigger than both of us, bigger than this country. You'll see." Before I could respond, a mercenary lobbed a smoke canister onto the dock. White fog erupted, swallowing the scene in choking clouds. Shouts echoed, gunfire sparked blindly, and through the chaos, I felt hands rip at the case. Pierce was gone. The case was gone. And I was choking in smoke, blind and furious, as the freighter's engines roar. Ed louder and the chaos deepened into bedlam. The world vanished into smoke. Thick, stinging clouds rolled across the dock, swallowing lights, swallowing voices. Every shout echoed, distorted, and directionless. My eyes burned, my lungs screamed. The acrid haze clawed down my throat like fire. "Case is gone!" Someone coughed through comms. "Repeat, case is gone!" No kidding. My arms still ached from the weight of it, and now they felt hollow, stripped bare. I groped through the haze, Glock raised, trying to orient myself. Footsteps thundered past, boots, heavy and deliberate, too many to tell if they were mine or theirs. "Pierce!" I roared into the fog, my voice cracked, swallowed whole by the chaos. "You're not getting away with it!" A shadow lunged from my left. I pivoted, firing once. The figure dropped with a grunt, a mercenary's rifle clattering to the planks. More shadows moved in the smoke, darting shapes that seemed to dissolve the moment I aimed. It was like fighting ghosts. Somewhere to my right, Meredith shrieked, not words, just raw terror. Then another gunshot. Silence. My earpiece crackled. "Agent, fall back! The freighter's pulling away! We're losing containment!" I stumbled toward the sound of the ship's engines, the fog thinning just enough for a glimpse. The freighter's gangplank was retracting, groaning metal echoing across the water. Figures scrambled aboard, mercenaries dragging crates, one of them clutching the steel case tight to his chest. The diamond. "Negative," I barked into comms. "I have visual on the package. Repeat, visual on the package. They're moving it onto the ship." I broke into a sprint, boots pounding against the dock. Shapes lunged at me from the fog, mercenaries trying to cut me off. I shoved one aside, cracked another across the jaw with the butt of my Glock, fired twice at a third. My ears rang, my vision tunneled. But the only thing in my head was the case. The gang. Plank was almost up. I launched myself forward, shoulder first, hitting the metal with a grunt. My boots scraped, slipping as the plank rose, but I clawed upward, adrenaline tearing through my veins. The merc with the case turned, eyes wide behind his mask. I raised my pistol. Another shot split the air, this one not mine. Pain exploded across my arm. The Glock spun from my hand, clattering into the black water below. I gritted my teeth, clinging to the rising gangplank with one good hand as the merc sneered and vanished onto the ship with the case. The plank jerked, rising fully, leaving me hanging above the ocean. For a heartbeat, I dangled there, salt spray biting my face, the freighter pulling further away with every second. Then, strong hands grabbed me, bureau agents, hauling me back onto the dock before I plunged into the waves. The spotlight from our helicopter cut through the thinning smoke, illuminating the freighter's stern as it churned into the night. Too far for a clean shot, too late for a boarding team. The diamond was gone. Pierce was gone. and the ship was vanishing into international waters, dragging the case, and everything I'd fought for, into the dark. I sank onto the dock, coughing, blood dripping from my arm. Around me, the port looked like a war zone, bodies down, civilians scattered, agents moving with frantic urgency. My chief's voice roared over comms, shaking with fury. "Agent, report. Do we have the package?" I closed my eyes, swallowing the bitter taste of failure. "Negative," I rasped. "The package is on the freighter. They're gone." Silence. Then the cold reply. Then this just became an international incident. Washington was a storm. By the time I landed back in D.C., the Diamond's escape had already turned into a wildfire. News anchors buzzed with breaking reports of a massive shootout at Port Fairmont. Grainy cell phone footage showed flashes of gunfire, plumes of smoke, and agents shouting as civilians screamed in the background. They didn't know the details yet, but the words FBI failure were already on every chyron. Inside the bureau, the mood was worse. The director's conference room felt like a war tribunal. Maps of shipping lanes glowed across the screens, dotted with real-time markers showing where the freighter might have gone. Naval intelligence confirmed the vessel had turned off its transponder an hour after leaving port. It had vanished into the Atlantic like a ghost. "You had the package in your hands," the director said, her voice like ice. "And now it's in the wind." I kept my jaw tight. "With respect, ma'am, the operation was compromised by third-party mercenaries. Pierce wasn't acting alone. This was bigger than just an HOA board playing pirate." "Bigger?" The deputy director leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Do you realize what just happened? That diamond wasn't just valuable. It's classified as a strategic asset. If it falls into the wrong hands, it could destabilize entire governments." The room fell silent. They didn't say it outright, but the truth was clear. This wasn't about money. The diamond had properties, power, something worth sending killers halfway across the globe, something worth risking war. I took a breath, forcing my voice steady. "Then we need to escalate. The freighter's headed east, but it can't hide forever. Satellites, NATO intelligence, naval patrols. We track it, intercept it before landfall." The director's eyes bored into mine. "Do you understand what you're suggesting? If we pursue in international waters, we risk sparking a diplomatic firestorm. Congress is already on us. The president wants answers, and if the media finds out what's actually inside that case—" Her words trailed off, but the implication landed like a hammer. If the diamond's true nature was revealed, the world would panic. Then the door opened. A man in a tailored suit stepped inside, Secret Service pin glinting on his lapel. The room straightened instantly. He didn't need to announce himself. "The president wants a direct briefing," he said, his tone leaving no room for negotiation. His eyes shifted to me. "And he wants you in the room." My pulse quickened. This wasn't protocol. Field agents didn't speak directly to the president unless things were beyond critical. The director gave a curt nod. "Go, and choose your words carefully. The Oval Office has no patience for excuses." Minutes later, I stood in the heart of the White House. The Oval Office glowed under soft lamps, the seal in the carpet crisp beneath my boots. And behind the resolute desk, the president leaned forward, hands clasped, expression grim. "Agent," he said, his voice measured, heavy with the weight of the free world. "I've been briefed on the situation. A diamond, massive, anomalous, stolen from this country, now in the hands of foreign mercenaries. And an HOA officer with suburban connections managed to outmaneuver the FBI at one of our ports." His eyes narrowed. "Tell me I'm not about to wake up tomorrow and watch a global crisis unfold on live television." I swallowed hard. "Sir, it's already unfolding." The president's gaze didn't waver. "Then stop it. Expose them. The world needs to know who's pulling these strings. You have full authorization, media, military, every tool at your disposal. But if this leaks before we control the narrative, if panic takes root, it won't just be your career on the line. It'll be this entire administration's." He leaned back, voice dropping lower. "And agent, fail again. And we may lose more than a diamond. We may lose the country's stability." The room seemed to shrink around me. For the first time in years, I felt the full gravity of the badge on my chest. This wasn't just a mission anymore. It was a countdown to chaos. The trail led across the Atlantic. Days of relentless pursuit, satellite pings, naval intercepts, covert chatter from Allied intelligence finally gave us what we needed. The freighter that vanished from Fairmont surfaced again, docking in secrecy at an abandoned naval yard outside Lisbon. Whoever orchestrated this wasn't hiding anymore. They were staging something bigger. We moved fast. No bureaucracy, no hesitation. Joint FBI, Interpol, and Portuguese special forces hit the yard under cover of night. Floodlights snapped on, rotor blades thundered overhead, and the ground shook with the force of boots and gunfire. I was at the front. I had to be. Inside the rusting warehouse, the air smelled of salt and oil, but another scent lingered too. Ozone, sharp and unnatural, like lightning trapped in a bottle. That's when I saw it. The steel case was open on a steel table. And there it was. The diamond. Bigger than a man's fist, it glowed with a cold, otherworldly light. Its facets caught every beam, refracting it into violent shards of color that painted the walls with shifting patterns. This wasn't just carbon compressed over eons. It hummed, it pulled, as if alive, as if aware. And beside it stood Donald Pierce. His suit was gone, replaced by body armor. His face was battered from Fairmont, one eye bruised shut, but his smile was stronger than ever. "You see now, Agent?" he shouted over the chaos, arms spread wide as mercenaries clashed with special forces around him. "This isn't a jewel, it's a relic, a weapon forged before history itself. Governments will beg for it, nations will fall for it, and I will be the one who decides who holds it." I raised my weapon. "Not tonight." He lunged for the diamond. Time seized. Med 2 stretch. Light burst from the stone, blinding, searing. For a heartbeat, I felt its weight in my mind, pressing against my thoughts, whispering promises of power. Every nerve screamed at me to grab it, to keep it. But training cut through temptation. I fired, not at Pierce, not at the mercenaries, but at the table itself. The steel buckled, sparks flew, and the diamond toppled onto the concrete floor. The hum rose into a shriek. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. Then it shattered. The blast knocked us all to the ground. Light poured out like a tidal wave, swallowing the warehouse, spilling into the night sky. For a moment, the world was pure brilliance. No shadow, no sound, no time. And then, silence. When my vision cleared, the warehouse was in ruins. Mercenaries sprawled unconscious, weapons scorched. The diamond was gone, reduced to glittering dust that drifted like snow in the sea breeze. Pierce lay near the wreckage, unmoving, his hands blackened, his smile burned away. Meredith was nowhere to be found. Whether she fled or was consumed by the blast, I'll never know. I staggered to my feet as helicopters circled overhead. The operation was over. Days later in Washington, I stood once more before the president. Cameras and reporters clamored outside the White House gates, desperate for answers. But inside, the briefing was brief, almost cold. "The artifact?" he asked. "Destroyed," I said. He studied me for a long moment, then gave a curt nod. "Then the world will never know what almost happened, and it must stay that way." The media spun the story into a simple narrative. FBI foils international jewel smuggling ring. The truth, the power of the diamond, the corruption of the HOA, the mercenary armies, the brush with something beyond human, never reached the public, but I knew. And as I walked out of the White House, past the flashing camera, and shouted questions, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end, that somewhere another relic like that diamond waited to be uncovered. And when it surfaced, someone else would try to claim it. This time, though, I'd be ready.